Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining what is the last of this series of the Erasmus Goes Digital webinars for this part of 2021. And today we are very happy to have you to look into what was the third topic that we wanted to explore with you, which has to do with providing guidance to the colleagues using the Erasmus dashboard on what's going to happen, what's going to change, how can they be prepared to connect. But before we get into the nuts and bolts, we have a very special guest with us today. And without further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome to Nadia Manzoni from the JAC, and thank her for joining us and invite her to set the stage for the discussion.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nadia. I am working for the European Commission, leading the team for Erasmus Plus in higher education. And I'm here just to welcome you all, to say thank you for faithfully attending to these Erasmus Goes Digital webinars, and also to acknowledge the great efforts that all of you have been making in digitalizing Erasmus Plus. It's a big year for the European Student Card Initiative, and perhaps I'd take a few moments just to explain a bit how the bigger context of the European Student Card Initiative. This is an umbrella term that we have decided to call this big process of digitalizing Erasmus Plus. And when we talk about the European Student Card Initiative and its big rollout, we mean several different initiatives, several different work strands. And one of these is Erasmus Without Paper, and the topic of today's webinar. So digitalizing slowly, progressively, more and more administrative documents, let's say, which are needed to make the mobility of students more fluid and more efficient. The other aspect of the European Student Card Initiative is, of course, the Erasmus Plus app, the Erasmus Plus application, which is going to hopefully be on the smartphones of all the Erasmus Plus mobile participants, and which will make their access to information more direct and create direct communication lines between these participants and their institutions. And the third part of the European Student Card Initiative is the European Student Card itself. So it's only one part of it. It is especially going to become important as of autumn this year, when we will launch more work on this, and you will be all informed in due course. So this is just to give you an overview of the three big projects within the European Student Card Initiative, and to tell you one more time that it is that we know that it's a lot of work, and that it takes a lot of effort from your side, a lot of adjustments, but we're hopefully putting at your disposal the necessary resources and guidance. And thank you for raising all the questions, which helped us structure today's session to be able to answer most of them. Yes, keep them coming if it's still relevant. Thank you very much, and have a successful session.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And I'm going to pick up exactly where you left it, because, and I will do that by trying to share my screen while I talk. Not the best person in multitasking, but after all these webinars, I should be about to nail it. So some of you, maybe many of you, have been with us last week when we had the last webinar, which was focused on the question of the third-party providers, how they are coming into the network, because there are literally hundreds of universities that will be part of the EWP ecosystem in that manner. Whilst today we're going to focus squarely on what happens from the perspective of the dashboard users. And last week I mentioned that many of the questions we received were not fully aligned with the scope of the topic from last week. But we went through them with a great deal of care and attention, because many of them were actually about today's webinar. So one of the comments we've picked up, and by the way, every time you see this slide with a yellow frame, this is something we've picked up from the comments that we received, not just last week, but also some of you that sent them in the last hours as part of the invitation for the conference. And one of the colleagues, we don't know whom, because for the most part they were anonymous, but one of the colleagues says, please ask your audience what they need from the sessions. And so we took this as the motto for trying to structure today's session, and we sliced the webinar, and this is probably going to end up being a little bit longer than the one from last week, into 3 components. Component number 1 deals with, and again, to borrow from the words of maybe one of the colleagues in attendance, what will be the updates of June in the dashboard exactly? Now, I have to say that these questions are here, or comments that are here verbatim. So sometimes we've made adjustments for clarity, but they came through the chat boxes. If they're not grammatically correct, I think I beg you not to focus on that. We try to stick to the essence of it. And so this will be the first block of today's webinar. And obviously June, as you might have gathered, is a big month. A lot of things are happening. It's really the moment where the lights go on in terms of the interoperability effort, and the dashboard users, like the users of the third-party providers, will be affected and benefit from it. And so we will try to walk you step by step on what are the biggest changes and give you a sense of what's coming. After that, we got so many colleagues saying we need concrete and practical examples. So we recruited the help of some of our colleagues in these projects coming from 3 of our universities to help us go through a basic step-by-step and demo of what we're working on and how the dashboard can be used. To a large extent, I should say that this overlaps or complements the information that is already in the Knowledge Center, where there are also some tutorials. But we'll do it live, we'll do it together, and hopefully this will help some of you that might not feel familiar with these tools to find their foot and to become a little bit more comfortable with it. And then, for the third part of the questionnaire, we're going to tackle something that was captured beautifully in this remark, which was, what was the point of having the questionnaire if no questions were answered? So we got around 400 questions in between last week and this week. We went through all of them, and you can imagine there were lots of duplicates, and we whittled down to around 100 questions. So on the third part of the webinar, some of them are clustered, some of them are just all put together. Altogether, the colleagues here today, we will try to cover as much ground as possible, because obviously we have every interest that you feel comfortable with what's happening next. And there are many questions that have to do with, how do we connect and what are the rules? And if you bear with us, we will try to answer as many of those as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to a very dear colleague of mine to walk you through the first part of the webinar. And Daiga, the floor is all yours.
So thank you so much for that. And actually, I will start with the question to you. And for that, I will have to share my screen very briefly. Can I get the thumbs up from my colleagues that everything is fine?
We can see our screen and we can see it in presentation mode now. So it should be fine for hopefully all the colleagues.
No, it's in the night notes. Oh, sorry. Just very briefly, I'll just, by now I should have learned this.
Take your time. Practice makes perfect.
Just a second. And now it should be smooth, right? Okay, perfect. But yes, after this introduction, I have to start with the fact that actually I have a question to you. Because indeed, there are lots of questions that we want to tackle and deal with today, but to also better understand whom are we talking to, we actually want to understand who are here as the audience. And for that, I would really invite you to go to the Mentimeter or simply menti.com and enter this code. You can maybe just simply make a note of the numbers or make a quick screenshot. And yes, it will be a simple question asking, how do you plan to connect to the EWP? And yeah, we would really love to see the audience and chat with you over the coffee breaks, and are looking forward to the conferences and the chance to really interact with you. But as that's not the case and it's not the option now, this information would really help us to better understand where we are and yeah, better actually organize and structure the session. I will also share this slide at the very end of my intervention. So just in case if you didn't manage to get the numbers, you'll also be able to get them later. I see slowly but surely that some of the answers are already pouring in. So yes, you'll see the slide again, and in the meantime, I'll actually go to the next slides of my presentation. And as João was outlining, I will start with a very brief summary on what happens in June and what exactly does that mean for the Erasmus dashboard users. And what I really want to start with, and what I want to say is that June 2021 is the moment when the EWP becomes a tangible reality for most of us. And it's really a milestone that marks a completely new era for Erasmus Plus that I'm sure many of you have been working towards and have been waiting for a very long time. So what exactly changes for the dashboard users at this moment? And the answer is actually very, very simple. And it's everything and nothing. And let me elaborate on that. What exactly does it mean? Because when we say nothing, we actually really mean it, because the processes will function as before. So the creation, finalization, and of the learning agreements, as well as renewal of the interinstitutional agreement procedure, will not change from what you know already very, very well and you are very familiar with in the system as it is now. You will simply find that learning agreements and interinstitutional agreements in your document list are also coming from other partners in the Erasmus Without Paper network. And you'll also be able to receive and send to any other network partners, regardless of what is the system that they're using to view and interact with these documents themselves. So this is a very subtle but transformative change that really changes everything. And from now onwards, this interoperability and efficiency gains that we have been talking about and the community is looking forward to is really becoming a reality. Sorry, getting all the notifications. But to continue on, and what I want to highlight actually in my intervention is to better understand these implications of what does that mean for you. I want to outline just the 5 key points that it's worthwhile to keep in mind as we are embarking on this transition. And the first one is the connection to the Erasmus Without Paper network. And here I want to say that the Erasmus Without Paper network will work, and it works now and will work as a giant phone book. And if you are not in that phone book, then unfortunately you will not be able to send or receive the data through this network. And also what that means also through the dashboard. So we assume that if you are here today for this webinar, as it was announced that it's for the Erasmus dashboard user, that you're very likely to connect to the network via the dashboard. So in that case, what is necessary is simply for you to navigate to the EWP settings page that can be found in the left menu bar and activate the EWP, be it the online learning agreement or the interinstitutional agreement API connection. And voila, you are actually part of the EWP network. It's as simple as that. And it's really just the first step is indicating the SHA code or simply the domain or the homepage as you have for the institution. And yes, then select which APIs you want to connect. And I also want to highlight that the settings by default are off. So you need to enable them. And as soon as that is done, you're really reachable to all of the network partners and can exchange be it the learning agreements or the interinstitutional agreements. And I really also want to stress that you have to remember that if the settings are off, you would not also receive the learning agreements and interinstitutional agreements from other network partners, be it the dashboard, be it the third-party providers, or be it the in-house systems. So it's indeed a key step that you have to make to ensure that you are really ready for this digital Erasmus. The next logical question, of course, is when? When does this kick in? And we're planning to make this functionality available in mid-June. And in fact, the original plan was to complete the connections already by the end of May. And we are carrying out the tests with the big providers, for example, the Mobility Online, the Move On, as well as several universities. And the tests with the universities are nearly complete and are showing also good results. Yet it seems that other partners are still needing some extra time to connect. And in order to feel confident about this technical testing with the diverse crowd, hence also the delay of when this will become available. As the next question that you might be asking to yourselves is, then with whom can I exchange? And the exchange, as I highlighted, can happen really only between the two parties that are already in the EWP network. So from the So when you're creating the learning agreements or interinstitutional agreements, effectively you would be able to select from the pool of the partners that have connected and that have activated this connection by either their local systems, by the dashboard, or connected by the third parties. And to be more practical, an example from the online learning agreement platform: when the students are making creating this online learning agreement documents, in the second and third step, they need to indicate the host and home institutions. And if this home and host institution is in the network, they will be able to continue as usual and finalize the creation of the document. If, however, the selected institution has not activated the connection, they would receive the notification as shown here, and unfortunately, they would not be able to continue and finalize the document. The similar logic, of course, would also then apply to uploading the online learning agreements and initiating them from the Erasmus dashboard by the institutions, as well as when creating the interinstitutional agreements. And this functionality has big advantage in that it's checking whether your partner is reachable or it's not the case yet. And what that is then interlinked with is, it's also, of course, key to understand, like, what are the types of notifications that are being received by the different parties. And here I want to clarify that for the dashboard users, effectively, really nothing changes, because you or your colleagues, if they're using the Erasmus dashboard, they will receive the notifications as per typical workflows. When they are creating the new learning agreements or any of the documents are being signed or updated, the workflows of these notifications stay as they are now. What will change is that the partners that are other EWP connections, they will no longer receive these email notifications from the dashboard. And instead, the dashboard will simply talk to their systems. So what will happen, that these systems, be it from the third-party providers or from the local systems, they are responsible for distributing the notifications as they see fit and as it's customary for them. So basically, it is their responsibility, and it's their internal workflows of how exactly the specific colleagues are notified, be it in the case of finalizing the learning agreements or the interinstitutional agreements. So this is really the practical implementation of one of the key principles that we have in the Erasmus Without Paper network, is such that everyone exchanges the data and of course also the notifications with whomever they want and exactly the way they want to do so. So, and regardless of who are the partners, the notifications, they are in charge basically of how they are receiving this information and how they can then manage it internally. And with that, the next question that many of you might be actually wondering about is, if each university gets the notifications through the system, does this mean that there is this single point of entry for them? And the answer is actually yes. Because what this means is that from this moment onwards, from when this integration comes live in mid of June, all of your interinstitutional agreements and learning agreements will be forwarded to just one system of your choice. So without the EWP mailman, you would continue receiving the notifications from different places. And we know how annoying it can be, especially for the colleagues that are still finalizing their connection to the network. So things will get much, much simpler. If you are in the EWP network, you control where all of the agreements will land and how you can manage them. Unfortunately, if it's not the case, if the connection is not finalized yet, you would still be stuck with the paper and emails as it's still 2014. And to finish up the presentation and share some nice actually surprises that we think you might like a lot, is we wanted to share some other details that would be changing. And the first one is, following the popular demand, the notifications to review the learning agreements from now on will be sent to the contact person indicated in the online learning agreement. The responsible will still be indicated as an optional field, but the contact person from now onwards will be the one notified. The second aspect, also driven by the popular demand, is that we're happy to confirm that shortly after the EWP connection is complete, we will also enable the export of the PDFs of the interinstitutional agreements. And we know that, yes, it can be handy and useful. Sorry, it could be useful for many of you, and we're happy actually that it can finally also be realized, and we can offer this functionality. The third aspect that we wanted to mention is also referring to the interinstitutional agreement, and is that later in July, we will also enable the option to receive a weekly digest of emails. And we know that this renewal season of interinstitutional agreements will be, well, it will be a challenging experience for many of you. So we want to make sure that your inbox is not being completely flooded, and we hope that it can also offer support to you. And with that, and to actually discuss in more detail the interinstitutional agreement details, I will invite a colleague from the University of Porto, Francisco. And yes, well, thank you for your attention from my side.
Thank you, Daiga. I will just give 1 minute to this. Oh, okay, that slide for people to connect. So let me share my screen. And now I believe it's the Interinstitutional Agreement Manager in practice. So what to do to use the dashboard to create interinstitutional agreements, to manage interinstitutional agreements. This is a test account that we have in dashboard for us to do the management of all the details. And the first thing you do is you log in into the system, and then you have access to the general information of the institution. After that, you have the accounts and access. And this is important because this is where you define which persons of your institutions have access to what. Either editing the settings of EWP, editing agreements, signing. You have to give roles here, for example, interinstitutional agreement editing. And then in the permissions, you can select multiple, you can edit step by step, edit creating agreements, you can do whatever you want. And even so, if you want to create a whole role for the interinstitutional agreement, so just create the role and select the multiple permissions that you want, and they will be added to that role. After that, you have the account management, where you actually add the users, and you select the role that was previously added, and then you will have the selected permissions for the selected persons. This is the first step of getting on with the interinstitutional agreement. The second step, and it's a very important step that Taiga already mentioned, is to go to this left sidebar in the EWP settings part and check if your institution is on the EWP network, either by dashboard or not. By default, like Daiga said, the no is the one selected, but you can just come here and select the yes and save, and you will be, if everything goes right, the dashboard will check if there are in the EWP network other nodes that represent your institution. But if not, the dashboard will then represent your institution in the network for the exchange of the interinstitutional agreements. The same is right for the exchange of the static information that we will talk about in a few minutes. If you come here, you select yes, and then you have the information. Next, and going directly to the default interinstitutional agreement data. What is this? This is the information that it's all the same in all the interinstitutional agreements. It's the information regarding the calendar, regarding the requirements, what about the inclusion and the accessibility measures that each institution has in place, housing, visa, additional information, every information that is static information and should not change from interinstitutional agreement to interinstitutional agreement should be the same, and it's on a separate page on the left side, and you can edit this part. Please notice that you have on the top a box to confirm that you agree with the terms and conditions. And if you do not do that, when you insert the details, I will just have here the website, just doesn't matter. I will just put this. When you try to add, it will give you an error because you have to check the checkbox So you agree with the terms and conditions, and then you have added, you receive a message, successful submitted, and then you have here the information that you just submitted. The same is valid for all the other values in here. Any of these save buttons, they will not work if you do not check the box. That, of course, now it's already checked. Next part, it's the interinstitutional agreement list. Here is where you will manage most of the interinstitutional agreements, or all of them, after the creation, of course. In here, you will have the possibility of checking if what is the status, if it's requested a partner signature, if it's waiting for your signature, if it's signed by both parties. In here, you will have all the information regarding each of the agreements that you already have with some partners. But first, let me go to the creation of one. On the left side, you just click on the new digital interinstitutional agreement, and you have the first page of the creation of the agreement. And as you can see, you have a green text here saying that the dashboard is responsible for managing the interinstitutional agreements for your institution. So yes, you are able to continue and to send this agreement through the EWP network. You cannot proceed through the buttons below while you have not confirmed that you agree with the terms and conditions. After that, the button appears in the bottom. You can just click next page. What's the next page? It's the definition of the institutions that will be partners in the EWP network, in the interinstitutional agreements. And in here, you will have the possibility to insert the name of the institutions, the Erasmus code, countries, cities, and the contact names of the persons, contact details, the websites, and of course the requirements of which from each years it will be valid. So if I select here, I'm not writing. Okay. Let me just, oh, this is the name. My name and my email, and this is the name. I will just use this. As you may have, I don't know if you have noticed, but we are experiencing some issues regarding getting the partner data from the European Commission server. But we are actively working on that and fixing that connection. But if you insert here the details, this will give you an error, I believe, yes. Because of that connection, but it will open the fields for editing. So then you can edit the information of the institution. And as you can see, it already filled all the data. And it says in green as well that this institution is managed in EWP Network and it's able to exchange interinstitutional agreements with us. So I believe all the required fields are filled. If you want to fill any other fields, you are free to do so. And then you have all the required. Am I missing some fields? I don't think so. Okay. Some field may be missing. And then you have the next page. The next page is the page where it shows you the default interinstitutional agreement data that I just spoke about. In this page, you will find the information that you inserted in the default interinstitutional agreement data. It's just for seeing, and the partner information that was fetched from EWP if the partner is also advertising this information through EWP. If the partner is not, like in this case, no information was retrieved from the partner will show. But as these APIs will be implemented, like Daiga said, and the institutions are going through them at this moment, they will be available, and most of the information will be here in a few weeks. And then the next page. The next page is where you define the mobility numbers that you want per academic year. And then you have the sender Erasmus codes, for example, Maribor to Ghent. And then if you want, you have the possibility of checking organizational units if they are present. These are the numbers received from the EWP network. It's a bit tricky, but these are the numbers that we have to manage at this moment. And then you defined the mobilities per year, I don't know, 4 ISCED codes that you want. And then you click add if you want to add any more ISCED codes, just selected the same. Then the mobility type, what kind of mobility it is. And depending on the type of the mobility, this will change because it will be total days or total months and the study cycles if applicable. And then you click, you put the number, I don't know, 6, and you say that it's the second cycle. You can either select multiple ones if you want to. And then you have the option to select if this specific mobility or mobilities are blended mobilities for students. Then you have the language skills. I will just select anything. Recommendation level, the ISCED code that is referring to, and you just click add if you want to add another one. And any other information that you may want to add in this page. If, I believe it's fine. Okay, so if I want to add another cooperation conditions, I just click here and I'm on the page of adding a new cooperation condition, page 2, like you can see on the top. In this, you can send, for example, the other way around from Ghent to Maribor. And we can say here that it's 4 again, different ISCED code. The mobility type is, now it's staff, and you just put the number of months, of days, and then the language skills as well. Okay. And then when you are completed with all the, if you want to add any more cooperation conditions, you just click add. If you want to delete any cooperation conditions, you just click delete, and it will delete the cooperation condition that you are working at this moment. If I click delete here, it will delete the page 2 cooperation condition and will leave the first one that I created, so I can edit it and then create a new one. If I click it here, another one will be created, and we would be on page 3. The next page is the summary. So everything that you have inserted before will be present here. The creator data, the partner data, the details of the academic years, and the cooperation conditions. Condition 1, from Maribor to Ghent, for mobilities, 6 months. And then condition 2, from Ghent to Maribor, for mobilities, 5 days. And you have here all the information. If you want to check the default data that was present on the page, and it's the same that is the default data on the left menu, and also the default data of the partner, you just check this box here, and it will hide and show the information of each of the partners. Then, being both partners in the network, you just click sign and submit, and the agreement will be then digitally signed on the server, and will go. The partner will receive an EWP notification saying that a new agreement was created in dashboard. So please come fetch the details of the agreement so you can see in your system. And the creation of the agreement ends here, and you should be able to list it on the left menu, interinstitutional agreement list, and the agreement should be here. After this, the agreement will be with the status requested partner signature. So you will be waiting for the partner to sign it or edit it and send you back the modifications or saying a notification that it was signed. Meanwhile, you have the possibility to delete it, if you want it. If you don't want it anymore and you know the partner will not do any modifications or haven't accepted it, you just have the possibility to delete it from here and to view the details in case you want to view them while you are waiting. Also, on the bottom of this view page, you will have send new EWP notification. If the partner missed the first notification or if it wasn't success sending the notification, you have the possibility to come here and resend a new EWP notification. So the partner is again notified that there is an agreement in the dashboard that they should fetch the data on their system to get the details. You have also, let me just change tabs here to show you another agreement, because on that institution I didn't have the whole list. So in here, in these institutions that I am right now on the list, you can see that I have the status need to sign or edit. What this means? This means that a partner has created an agreement on their side, on their platform, and has sent us a notification saying that they have new details on a specific agreement or they have a new agreement. And we fetch that data and it is here. So now it's your turn to view it, view the details of this agreement that the partner has created. You can hide and show the cooperation conditions that are in this agreement, and then have the possibility of sign final agreement if you want to. And of course, you have to have the correct permissions to do so. In case you do not agree with the information that is on that agreement, you have, of course, the possibility of editing that information, making changes to the agreement, and then send the changes to the partner so the partner can accept them or not and change it again over and over again. And pretty much the editing part is very much the part of creating new agreement with the same details, the same menus, and all the same information. What happens when both agreements are signed? I don't think I have an example here. Perhaps I have in here. Okay, I have one agreement here. If the agreement is signed by both parties, you will just see the status signed by both parties, and you just have the option to view it, view the content of the agreement, because it's already finished and there's no modifications to do on. On the left side of this interinstitutional agreement list, you will find a menu which will help you go through all the agreements, filtering the information. After having 100 agreements, may be hard to go through this page by page, and you may make use of these filters. And then you may ask, what happens if some partner creates an agreement, sends a notification to the dashboard, and somehow I haven't received this notification. I need to see the agreements that the partner has created, but I don't see it in the dashboard. You have the option on the left side to list EWP agreements. This will give you a select box where you can check all the institutions that are present in the registry, in the phone book that Daiga spoke a few moments ago. I will just select our partners from Ghent again. And you have the options to select the years, of course, if you want to filter, and you list the agreements with that specific partners. And this will give you the list of agreements that the partner has in the EWP network, is advertising in the EWP network that he has with us. After checking the agreement, if no local ID is matching, this means that the partner has the agreement, but we don't have the information in the dashboard yet. So let's view. We can view the agreement details, and here is the information about the agreement and all its information. And at this moment, the agreement is not yet in the dashboard. We are just checking if this is the information we want to go through, and if it is, we have a button in the bottom saying download to dashboard, and we can then fetch the agreement data, put it in the dashboard, and it will be on the status for us to edit or sign it as we want it. And this is pretty much all the functionalities that are present here. I hope I was understandable. And now I pass the word to Daiga again, I believe, to introduce the next colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the fantastic presentation. And I think, yes, the detail and the step-by-step guide will be of great use for many of our colleagues. And yes, to further elaborate on this and to further talk about the process of the finalization and the renewals of the interinstitutional agreements, we'll have our colleague Nacho from University of Alcalá. And I will let him then, yes, tell more about him and his role and yes, his experience with the infrastructure as such. Nacho, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daiga. I believe you can hear me and you can see me at this moment. I'm very glad to have been invited by the European University Foundation to participate in this webinar. My name is Ignacio Rodriguez, Nacho Rodriguez from the University of Alcalá. I'm the policy advisor on internationalization at the Office of International Affairs of our university. We have been involved in several processes connected to the digitalization of the Erasmus Plus program for more than 4 years. I'm very glad that I should intervene now, shortly after the fantastic presentation on the different functionalities of the Interinstitutional Agreements Manager. I am glad to do that because I come from a university, another institution like yours, like many of yours, that are now under some stress to go and feel and be secure that we reach the different milestones established in the so-styled European Student Card initiative, particularly when we talk about interinstitutional agreements, but also about online learning agreements. So, Daiga, if you may go to the next slide. This is something that everyone knows, and those that have been today from the beginning of the webinar know clearly about this obligation, this need to negotiate and sign interinstitutional agreements for the current program, the program that ends in 2027 digitally. What I'm going to talk now is that though the Commission insists that we should renew the interinstitutional agreements digitally, this doesn't mean that it's an automatic process at all. The tools, as described by our colleague from Porto, and the functionalities of the tools and the coming functionalities of the tool will help us a lot. But the renewal is something else. And it's something crucial precisely in a moment where we are waiting a little bit for the red flag saying that we have begun the race. We know that we're still in testing phase, that different national agencies, I'm sure that your respective national agencies have communicated to you that it's not yet the time to renew, but the time to be prepared. So my main aim in the coming minutes here is just to share with you how a middle-sized institution like the University of Alcalá, but deeply committed with the mobility programs of the Erasmus Plus program, is preparing itself to this race. To this race that, though it has already begun, the starting point is not yet at this moment. We have to wait a few weeks to that point. So if we go to the next slide, what I'm going to tell you in 3 different slides are the 3 golden rules at this moment. Understand the new template. Get to know the Erasmus Without Paper Interinstitutional Agreements Manager, and contact your future partners. Don't wait any second. So this is what we can do at this moment. This is going to be, these 3 rules are going to preside how we can do it and when should we do it. So beginning with what can we do at this moment that we know we have everyone here that represents in this webinar a higher education institution holding Erasmus Charter, got the accreditation a few months ago. During the application process, we had to say something about how we were going to implement the so-style European student card initiative. And we know, according to the roadmap, that the interinstitutional agreement should be that would support mobilities in the academic year 2022-2023 should have been signed digitally. So it might seem rather jejune or simplify the question, saying that we should understand the new template. But I'm going to put it here and connect it to the presentation of our colleague from Porto, who knows everything on how get to know the Erasmus Without Paper manager. We should have a clear idea what means static information, which are the general conditions of the agreement, the general information of the agreement, sorry, which is the in the manager, the default information for the interinstitutional agreement and the terms and conditions of the actual cooperation of the agreement. The more we know about each part of the template of the agreement, which the Commission has offered for the sake of information, not for the sake of doing the actual negotiation and signing using those templates, the more we know, the better we will be able to interact with the different functionalities of the manager. So the second step is just to get to know the manager. Go back as many times as needed to the recording of this webinar and the different functionalities. Once you know what means default data, you will see how to operate and introduce that data of your institution in the interinstitutional manager. You will know why is that important, how the students are going to see it according to the roadmap and the different recommendations and the ideas behind establishing clearly in that part of the manager the general information, the default information. And do actually contact now your future partners about that other section of the interinstitutional agreement as such, which is the terms of conditions, what we have seen about the actual terms of the cooperation with our future partners. Type of mobilities for studies, for staff with teaching obligations, for traineeships, if that is mentioned in the interinstitutional agreements, the time that is established for those mobilities in terms of months, of number of students, the linguistic conditions, the minimum linguistic requirements that we are going to establish as connected to the field codes that to the field of education instead of ISCED codes that we are establishing that agreement. So we shouldn't wait for that. We shouldn't wait to the end of the testing phase and the actual possibility to introduce information. We should contact already our partners about those cooperation conditions while we consider how we are going to introduce that default information in the interinstitutional manager after the month of June. And meanwhile, we learn how to use the different functionalities of the manager. So if we go to the next slide about how could we do it, well, it's something that it depends absolutely on you. We do have a calendar, a general calendar established by the European Commission. The different national agencies and through perhaps the digital officers, this position established several months ago in its national agency, may have provided you about information of the calendar of the that established by the Commission, and actually perhaps sometimes exceptions to the calendar if there's something that is not working well. For those here today that are planning to connect to the Erasmus Without Paper network through the Erasmus Without Paper interinstitutional agreements manager to negotiate and sign them, these exceptions are, for instance, the Spanish National Agency said that it's not applicable to those. It might be applicable to those that are finding difficulties, as Daiga mentioned earlier in this webinar, that still have problems with the connection. But you need to plan a calendar. We have the established calendar from above, from the Commission in terms of the roadmap. But we have to collect that information that we need from other partners to sign successfully an interinstitutional agreement through the manager. So we need to contact our future partners, and we need to create the means of communications in our system, in our internal structure, for every single people involved in this process to know what they have to do at what time and when. And this even before we can actually sign in the Erasmus Without Paper Interinstitutional Agreements Manager, the interinstitutional agreements. So this is absolutely important, because you know that the Erasmus Without Paper dashboard does not prejudice which sort of internal structure you have. You need to project your internal structure into the dashboard. Project it according to one of the functionalities that if we have followed the former slide and the instructions, the instructions and the descriptions given by our colleague from Porto, you have already done, creating the accounts that are needed for those people in your institutions that are going to be in charge of this particular function towards the actual process of signing of interinstitutional agreements in the interinstitutional agreements manager. So I really want to conclude with a when in the next slide. When these 3 golden rules of how to get prepared in a situation, as I said before, that is basically stressful. We are in a change of a program. We come from having hundreds of agreements. Some universities or other institutions will have less, but we are confronted with a full renewal of them. So if we want to be ready for the deadline established by the Commission, again, that's an interinstitutional agreement supporting a specific mobility in the academic year 2022 and 2023, let's say September 2022, should we sign at that moment? We have to start now. Because at the beginning, I told you that contact your future partners, as you see, the 3rd golden rule in getting prepared from the angle, not of the tools that the Commission is asking us to use, but from the angle of our position towards the program, towards the Erasmus program, our position as an institution. We have already negotiated, we have begun to negotiate now the terms and conditions with our future partners. Sometimes we will try to assess the quality of our past agreement with some institutions during the former program 2014-2020. Sometimes we will decide not to have more cooperation. Sometimes we will want to increase the cooperation, adding new types of mobility or new numbers. But the 3 golden rules should preside also the when at this moment, because how we understand and a correct understanding of every single part of an agreement will again pave the way to use correctly the manager. How far we will be able and our staff will be able to understand the different functionalities of the interinstitutional agreements manager will help to understand that and to carefully check that we have prepared the information correctly just before that moment that we can press the button, as our colleague from Porto mentioned at the end of his presentation, and actually sign the agreement and notify to our future partner that we expect them to do so. And at the same time, we are not alone at this moment. Every single institution with whom we want to sign digitally an interinstitutional agreement is in the same situation as we are. Some of them will also use the interinstitutional agreements manager in the Erasmus dashboard. Some of them not. All of them should be connected to the Erasmus Without Paper connection. Please check what Aiga mentioned. Without the actual confirmation in the Erasmus dashboard, that in the settings of the Erasmus Without Paper, that you want to share exchange this information using your SAC to it, there is no flow of actual flow of data. So tell your partners how you are going to do it. Don't worry about this. Tell them that they are not worried. Some of them will be more advanced than you. Some of them will be slightly slower, but everyone is at this moment in the same vessel. And I'm sure that with a good planification, it's not only about the tools and how these functionalities will help to meet the requirements of the European Commission in terms of the roadmap towards the digitalization of Erasmus+. It will be also especially important for us to prepare for this new step. So thank you very much for your attention. And I sincerely hope that sharing with you what here at the University of Alcalá have designed as a specific program and calendar, internal calendar to meet that external calendar will help you in this unique process that we are confronted at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Nacho. And yes, with that and without further ado, actually, I will give the floor to our very dear colleague from University of Bergen, Kristin, and she'll focus on how the management of the online learning agreements in this transition time will, how basically they are dealing with the process and share her insights and her expertise.
Thank you, Daiga. I will start by sharing my screen. And as always, I hope it works like this. So I'm Kristin Skogedal, and I work as the Institutional Erasmus Coordinator at the University of Bergen in Norway. And in this presentation, I will focus on how we have used our experience with using the online learning agreement and how the dashboard works from our side, the online learning agreement from the student side, and also a bit about the new functionalities, but mainly about how it works and our lessons learned along the way, the difficulties that we've seen and how we have tried to tackle it. So let me just start by showing you some figures and a nice picture of a university. We are a mid-sized university, which could be of importance depending on how you deal with different new tools and how you decide to move on in the process. We have used the online learning agreement for our students, both incomings, but mainly for outgoings since 2018, I think. We implemented first for the outgoing students and then shortly after for the incoming students. And we have decided that we will use the dashboard, the Erasmus dashboard, both for OLA and of course for the interinstitutional agreements for now. We are not sure if we will use it forever, but at the moment this is what we use, and we sincerely believe that this experience has been very useful for us, even if we decide at some later stage to change the systems or the digital, use another digital system like our in-house system or a third-party provider connected via the EWP. But first, the online learning agreement, how does it work? I would just like to say, to begin with, that the online learning agreement that the students fill out, it corresponds with the official template from the European Commission. So the template they use, or the fields that they will fill in, they are the ones that are in the official template of the learning agreement. And we can see the information that the students fill in the Erasmus Plus dashboard. So, and I will show you this in a minute, because the information the information that the students fill in, we can see that from the other side of the system. And I'm not going to say so much about the technical part. I think we've had a very good demo of the interinstitutional agreement manager, but I will mainly speak of our experience in using the dashboard more than the technical solution, because it's quite simple and straightforward, if I can say so. At least I think we all know the learning agreement. It's not that much of a change from the old learning agreement to the digital format. It's just a digital or an online version of it. So I think it's familiar to most of us. And as for the technical solution, it's quite easy to use, I would say, and straightforward. And even though sometimes there are functionalities that I would wish for that are not there, I would say that all in all, it works fairly well. And it gives us many possibilities that we did not have with the old learning agreements coming in one by one on email or on paper. So the use of the dashboard gives us some kind of an overview of the students that we did not have earlier, and that we are very happy to have. And yeah. As for the workflow, just a few words. The signing and filling out, it has to go in the correct direction. So the student, in our case, the students will start by filling out the learning agreements. In some universities, they decide to let the university staff fill out the learning agreement, like pre-fill and upload the pre-filled learning agreement for the students. So there is an option here, but we would rather have the students to start or initiate the learning agreements themselves. So they would fill in and sign it. It's then automatically sent to the home coordinator that would either sign it or reject it. And if the home coordinator rejects the learning agreement, you should leave a message explaining why, and then it goes back to the student. So the student can then again fill out the necessary fields or make the changes, and then send it again for another round. So when it's signed by the home coordinator, it will go to the host coordinator. And when it's signed by the host, it's visible for all parties, either in the dashboard or if the students log in to see their online learning agreements. Students can only select the EWP partners. I think at the moment it's possible to also choose partners that are not in the EWP connection, but quite soon that will not be possible. So the student will not have the possibility to choose universities that are not part of the system. And yeah, there are no dead ends for signing either, meaning that the students, if they fill in the wrong person, and that happens quite a bit or quite often, it doesn't matter that much, because anyone at the university can log into the dashboard and sign the learning agreement. The one that signs the agreement will be the one that appears as this with the signature and with the contact information. So if it's sent to the wrong person, as long as the right person signs it, logins to the dashboard and sign it, then it's not a problem. Just very quickly show you how we use the dashboard with the overview of students. As you can see, you've seen the dashboard already, focusing on the IIA manager at the bottom, but now we're more at the top. I'm in the mobilities OLA 3.0, and I've chosen outgoing students. The OLA 2.0 is not possible to edit now. The students cannot create new OLAs in this old database, but it's more of a database where we can keep track of all our older students' OLAs. So this would be the 3.0, and it's our outgoing students for mainly this academic year. As you can see, we have 107. You see that in the middle here, 107 learning agreements this semester. But what I would mainly use this for is to look at the student's name. Of course, you can see I've taken away the first name, so that would be there as well. And last name, the mobility period, and of course the status, which is important to be able to track the course of the student before going and after, well, anyway, in the process of going on exchange. And of course, the receiving institution. And if you click on the box to the very right, you can open the learning agreement and see all the details, of course. So this would be an overview that we work with. We can use the filters, as you see more on the left. Personally, I will only, I think, or mainly use the search for specific names, and also I can click on the status to filter by status to see how many has been signed by all parties, students sending and receiving. Not many in this picture, but normally that would be the majority of the OLAs in the end of the process. And I will show again a short, or I will not use a lot of time with this, but this is a picture from the student side, and I will just show the reflection on the dashboard side. So from the student side and also from the staff side. So this is the filling out of OLA when it comes to the table A and B for the study program at the receiving institution. This is a student. It's not a real student. It's a test student. A student going to Rotterdam, and on this page, filling out the courses, introduction to Dutch culture, and I've put in 30 ECTS just to make it quicker, and it will be recognized as a mobility window, also 30 ECTS. So if we look at the next slide, you will see how it looks like the exact same student in the dashboard. When I look at it, you will see that this is on the lower part, you will see the course here, and you will also see what it will be recognized as. I would tick off for the automatic recognition. And here you can see this information on the left will be filled out automatically once the student chooses the correct university. So of course, University of Bergen would be the sending institution, and they would have to find the name and email, of course, then of the contact person. As for the receiving institution, Rotterdam, once you start typing it in, it appears with all the information with a country and the Erasmus code. You only need to fill in the faculty, but the students should be able to know that, I think. As for the contact person at Amsterdam, now at Rotterdam, they also need to find this information to fill it out. So this is just to show you briefly how it looks like from the two sides with the exact same information. But then I think that along these years, we've had quite a few questions that have, that we have had to tackle in one way or the other. And even if I think we have, I don't think there's one answer to all these questions. And I think some of these have appeared in the previous webinars, but also these are questions that we have been looking at when we have been working with the online learning agreement. So I think there are more than one answer to some of them, and maybe we would look at different solutions depending also on the type of university and how many students we have, and what kind of resources maybe that we are able to do, to put on this. And I will try to give you some of the answers, but I guess again this slide sums up I think important things to do when you're gonna look for the answers, but I will also try to go into a bit more detail. So the students, if they're looking for the responsible person, what we have done at the University of Bergen, and I've also borrowed an example from the University of Iceland from my colleague there, is to put quite detailed information on our websites directed at specific target groups of students. So at Iceland, they have this detailed information about how to direct their outgoing students, who they're going to contact, and for more information, and how they're going to fill in the learning agreement more or less in detail. We have the same at the University of Bergen, but I've included our example for the incoming students, and at the same page or in the same web section where we tell the students how to make their application, we have included information and details on how to fill in your OLA. So these are easy to find for the students, I would say. About the multiple signatures, that's a question that comes up quite often. And I can say that in our case, I didn't show this in the OLA that I showed earlier, but it is possible to have one contact person and one, I think it's called administrative contact person or something, that at least you can have two contact persons, but only one of them will sign. So we've made some changes in our workflow and made some, made sure that we had communication channels between the different levels in our institution to secure the right, well, that we didn't sign on any agreements, learning agreements that should not be signed. So this is how we have solved the issue of two signatures, but I'm sure that there would probably also be other possibilities of doing it. So maybe not the best answer to that, but again, I think it's important to find ways of doing it that will be possible to do and to adapt to your own university and your systems. And again, we've looked at the internal workflows to do this, and also to be flexible. For instance, if the students need to upload the learning agreement when they're applying to the host university, usually the OLA is not signed by them at that point in time. So we have then tried to postpone our deadlines, but at the same time make sure that the students can fill out the learning agreement, but they would then just use the PDF. It will not be completely signed by all partners, but they would use the PDF and upload it, for instance, to their application without all the signatures, but with maybe with two signatures, their own and also the home institution. And we would rather, if it would be then later on declined by the host, that's no problem, then the student would just go another round. If our partner is not connected via the EWP, and that has happened before, because maybe not because they were not connected, but they didn't have a user in the dashboard, and they would not process the learning agreement that would get to their university. But we would then, if the partner is not connected, again, the students could partially sign the learning agreement. At this point, that will probably not be possible, but I think that by June, the majority of the universities will be connected somehow. So again, we've decided to postpone again the deadlines for the learning agreements. Of course, they need to be signed before the semester starts, but usually that would be in September. So by the end of August, we will allow the students to send and to sign the learning agreements. And in the worst case scenario, I suppose we would have to make paper versions again, or at least the Word document to be sent out. But we'll see. I think we have a plan, more or less, so that we will be able to solve this. I think I would also say just very quickly, if the responsible person do not sign, that happens quite a bit, quite often as well, then we would encourage the students to download a PDF as well and send it to the correct host contact via email. It's not the perfect solution because then it will not be registered in the dashboard, and we would have a harder time tracking the status of our students' learning agreements, so they would have to send us a copy. But again, I think this is all temporarily solutions that we need to cope with in one way or the other until we have, hopefully in not that long, everybody connected and the system going. So to look at internal workflows and try to be flexible with deadlines would be important for us, and also to create networks and stay in touch with partners. I think that's really important. And there is always someone to reach out to if you don't know what to do and you don't understand how to proceed. So I'm sure that this is a very good way of working with this as well, at least in my experience. So very shortly, to conclude, I would say that it's really important to get familiar with all sides of the system. Of course, just look at the system, try to, I'm sure most of you have students in your system, even though you don't use it, there will pop in learning agreements anyway. So, and also maybe to test with partners and to have students helping you out, or looking at students, student assistants maybe, filling out the online learning agreement to see all sides of it. And also to look at existing procedures and workflows and see if the systems you use, the people, your colleagues, you need to adjust, and do you need different strategies at different departments or faculties. That's what we have done. Again, we are not that big, so it's maybe possible to differentiate in this way, and not, yeah, and of course, frequent trainings and workshops. I would have workshops with my colleagues at the University of Bergen at least once a semester, just to update and to get all the new colleagues on board. So it's more or less the same workshop, but we do it, so I usually do it every semester. And also, as I already mentioned, targeted information for different users, for students, for partners and colleagues. And I think it's also important to say that our biggest challenges with the online learning agreement and the dashboard has not been the digital part of it. It has not been the technical side of it. It has been the cultural side, or the way to adapt to the online tools and how to adapt our processes and how we work to match slightly better with the online tools. So with this, I will give the word back again to Daika.
Kristin, thank you very, very much. And thanks as well to Francisco and to Nacho, because I think it's very generous of you to join us to explain how you are doing things in your institution, how the tools work. And we're, on behalf of the UF, we're really very thankful for your input. But since we have you at end, I will quickly shift gears to the questions and answers. And we had a lineup that we had discussed with the various colleagues that are involved, but I'll shift it a little bit, because you touched upon so many, I think, important questions, Kristen, that with your help, maybe we would go over some of those, if that's okay. So I'll try to share my screen again, and bear with me for a split second. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to start with, as I was saying, questions that are specific, practical questions about the learning agreement and the dashboards. And I'll take the first one so that Kristen can catch her breath and get a glass of water. So again, we're taking stuff from what you've sent us, it's verbatim. And this is a question that pops up that Kristen just talked about, the LA not allowing 2 or maybe 3 or 4 signatures. And when the colleagues ask if there's a change coming, and to be very honest, the answer is no. And this is not out of bad will. I think some of us have been involved in discussions about recognition, not just in the context of Erasmus. Bologna experts have looked at these things. This is a really long-standing recommendation. And obviously understand that some institutions are not set up to shift to this paradigm. But I think this is where Kristen's example and what the colleagues in Bergen and many other universities have done over the years. I still remember in my alma mater going through the process of transitioning and adjusting the flows to make this work. And I think this is also, it's very deliberate that the template is designed in this manner. So this is not something that, that we envisage changing. The discussion of how this works when you have dual programs or programs with minors and majors, it goes a little bit beyond the scope of this webinar, but as I've said, this topic, I think I've been contending with it for at least 15 years, and I'm sure there are colleagues in attendance that have been dealing with these questions at the policy and at the practical level for even longer than that. But thank you for the question. Thank you for all the questions, really. We're crowdsourcing the webinar. Let's see if we can hit the nail on the head and give you some useful feedback. But Kristen, I think this one is for you. So we have a colleague here that says, using the dashboard for the first time, can you explain a little bit how to use the LA, where to find stuff, how to enter the students' data? I know you've just done a lot of this and maybe the question is already answered, but if there's something that you feel like adding.
Yes, maybe I can just say, I think maybe most of you would know this also, but you need an institutional account. And as shown earlier, you can make or allocate accounts to as many colleagues as needed to sign the learning agreements. And also, as for the previous question about the signing, so there's only one signature, but everybody can actually sign. So even if it's sent to your colleague that is not supposed to sign, you just need to log in and you can sign it, and will be the one that has the information and contact info at the learning agreement. So where to find the templates, I would say we don't really need to find any templates because it's all there. It's in the OLA for the students. They will just go through step by step. Actually, students, I think they are very happy with the OLA. They think it's very clear and maybe even easier to see than the paper version, because you only see one step at a time and you fill that out and you go to the next step. So the information that students puts in will be reflected in the dashboard. And again, we can choose if the student should enter the data themselves or if we as an institution would like to upload the OLA for the student. Then we would pre-fill some information, maybe not everything, not the courses, for instance, but some fields, and then the students will get an email notification to start filling out the rest. I think this answers it more or less, I hope.
So
and yes, yeah.
Myself, but you already see the questions coming fast and furious. Kristen, I don't know if you want to take this, if you want me to take it, as you wish.
I would just say that, well, it's correct, right? You need to choose. You cannot use both of them at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is an easy one.
Yeah.
You know, the notion of EWP, the tenet, as Naigo was saying, is you choose where your data goes as much as possible. And we will come to questions about what happens when you mix a little bit. But what you cannot mix is to have OLAs coming to different places at the same time. That basically breaks things a little bit. So that's very to the point. Now, there's a question about how do students receive their OLA once they've created them on the dashboard, and whether they need the Erasmus app for that. Kristen, what do you reckon?
They don't need the app, and actually to fill out the learning agreement at the moment, I would advise our students to do it on a computer, actually, because it's easier than doing it on a smartphone, because you maybe need a bit more of overview of all the fields, but I guess this is it will be adapted probably to phones as well. But you don't need to have the app. You can have the app, but they will get an email notification.
Indeed. And a little bit of publicity, because the app actually works on a desktop now as well. But the question of being in the process rather than, just putting whatever comes to mind in a kind of document, I think that point stands. So thank you, Christian. And now I'm going to try, with the help of maybe Daige, cover some really often asked questions. Christian, thanks again. Thank you so much, really. Daige, what do you think of this one?
So yes, another question is about if EWP is just for the study mobility for the moment. And the answer to that is actually yes. When it comes to online learning agreements, we have of course, also the track for the blended and the doctoral. But I mean, all in all, it is still the study mobility that we're dealing with. So will the interinstitutional agreements that have been exchanged with the dashboard users so far remain in the interinstitutional agreement manager, or will that be deleted? And is the pilot phase already over? And that is really an excellent question. And the session today is really something that we want to make sure that there is absolute transparency of what is happening and what you can expect. And in this regard, the pilot phase is over. What is happening now, we are finalizing the testing with the network partners. And the data that is currently there, obviously this dummy data, this testing data will be deleted. So that moment is still coming up, that the interinstitutional agreement manager, the data is wiped.
Thank you, Daige. And talking about deleting data.
So yes, and in this regard, will it be deleted, all information in a dashboard, or only the interinstitutional agreements? And we did hear some rumors somewhere talking about it and fearing if it also concerns the online learning agreements, and the answer is no. We are only talking about the interinstitutional agreement data that was really from these pilot phases, from this testing time. That will be deleted, but nothing else you have to worry about.
Indeed. Fake news dealt with.
So yes, we're using the third-party provider for the OLA. However, we are still receiving learning agreements on the dashboard from outgoing and incoming as well. I thought that should not be possible. Is that a bug? Another thing that we really try to clarify today, and indeed, from June onwards, you'll have one place where you determine where you want to receive the data. And that's exactly where it's going to land, nothing else. So all of these kind of situations where it might be distributed somewhere else as well will no longer happen. So very soon, this will not be a situation you have to deal with anymore.
Exactly. If I might add, this is the whole point of having built the EWP network, of the efforts towards enabling interoperability. This is basically the kind of teething problems that we have until we get where we want to be, but we're literally days away from start addressing them, and I hope in a permanent manner. So it really is an excellent question, and thank you for the colleagues that brought it up. And maybe one more for Daige.
Sure. Can you confirm that getting our shack code in dashboard will still allow us to use Move On for interinstitutional agreement, as is mentioned, that only one tool may be used for the EWP data exchange? So if you indicate it there, what also matters is that you switch on the APIs that are active. So no, as easy as you can connect via the dashboard to the network and say that I want the dashboard to represent me, and I want to exchange my learning agreements or interinstitutional agreements this manner, as easy you can disconnect it. So that simple on-off is basically all that you have to kind of worry about in this situation. So no, it will not create problems.
Yes, no, I think this is a question that speaks to the fact that going back several years, and even today, we talk about your data in one place, but this is one of many questions that we get where colleagues might get some data in one place and other data in a different. This is technically possible. It's not something we recommend you to do, but in this particular question, I think that the colleagues really are talking about getting interinstitutional agreement data on, in this case, MoveOn and the dashboard. That doesn't work. We will come to other questions that that touch upon this from different angles, because it seems to be something that the colleagues are dealing with and trying to figure out what the next move is. I'll maybe take it from here a little bit. Do you want to do this one, Dag? I've been working a lot on the app, so I think it's only fair as well.
Oh yeah, this is nice and easy. So is it possible to use the Erasmus app on the dashboard while using other functions on the third-party provider? Answer is very simple. Yes, you can.
And that's actually what we're encouraging you to do, particularly for the time being. That's exactly the use case. Now, maybe I'll jump in a little bit. I want some of the fun as well. We have a colleague asking, if our university is not ready to connect this year to the dashboard, is it okay to use the dashboard directly for a year and then connect when the IT project to connect is complete? Connect is the keyword on this question, seemingly. The short answer is yes. If you need to use the dashboard until you can go back to your in-house system, sure, as long as we can help you with that, no problem there. Now, we have another question about colleagues that are users of a third-party solution, and they ask, if we keep our dashboard account, which we have used for testing, node not connected, this is super important, so they haven't activated the API that Dag and Francisco were explaining about, will it interfere with our EWP connection via the third-party provider? The answer here is no, absolutely not. So you can keep your dashboard accounts. What we're really talking here is the connection. I think the colleagues that asked the question understand the subtlety between being in the dashboard and being in the dashboard and having the dashboard representing you in the network. Okay, this is a good question. This is a very fresh question, actually, that just arrived, and we thought we would try to sneak it into the slides. So a colleague was mentioning that they're worried because the national agency meeting stated that the dashboard is not supposed to be used by universities, but only by smaller AGIs. And that has been really confusing, and we're having problems with MoveOn, and we decided to stay with the dashboard. Can anybody confirm any of this, please? And yes, the colleagues are right, and there is some confusion, and we have to take some of the share of the responsibility for the conclusion. So to be very transparent, here's what's going on. The dashboard was designed to handle the smaller higher education institutions, and the research that was done when we were working on this suggested this would be less than 20% of the total universe of ECHA holders. The reality as of today is that 66% of EWP users are using the dashboard, and many of them might not need to stick around because, as we've seen in the questions that we're getting, they're on the way to a better place, presumably. But this creates really big problems in terms of maintaining the service running as smoothly as we wanted to. And so we have asked the national agencies to make sure that in some cases we have really huge universities, putting all of their data through the dashboards, and we don't want it to crash. It's as simple as that. So having said this, if you have an account on the dashboard and if you really have no better alternative, sure, we're not going to kick out. The challenge on our side is to keep the service running, make sure that it remains available as much as possible. Having said this, I also wanted to link this to the webinar from last week, which is if you have a provider, they are working really hard to connect you. And we hope that it's not going to be necessary for you to have such a contract and yet rely on the dashboard. So I understand that particularly as the technical testing is being carried out, you might not be getting the results that you want. And this is not specific to anyone. This is literally a quote from the question we got. But don't lose faith yet. And hopefully the colleague that wrote us will be able to connect through the third-party provider. Another example, which is a colleague trying to exchange interinstitutional agreement data with a university that uses MoveOn. They use Mobility Online. Both are connected to EWP, but the interinstitutional agreement data did not appear in the other system. Can you please comment on this? Unfortunately, I cannot. I have no idea what's going on with regards to the testing between MoveOn and Mobility Online. I take comfort, and I really appreciate that both systems are being carried out technical testing. So Again, I trust that they will sort out these issues, and hopefully it's a matter of days. Last time we talked to the colleagues, June was still very much the deadline for connecting all of these things. And as we've explained last week, it will happen in different points throughout the month. We're really not in a position to comment what the specific error might be. But we hope it's error that is going to vanish quickly. And we're saying this because we are also working with both companies and looking to make sure that the dashboard works perfectly. If this colleague would have tried this on the dashboard today, he also wouldn't get the results because these connections are not in production. They are undergoing technical testing. And another very to-the-point question. Problems, emails, supports, found a problem, answer been provided. To be honest, there's not a lot we can add on this topic. It's incredibly frustrating for us, and we know that many of you would need more support. I would refer you to the disclaimer that we have in the support channels regarding the capacity issues. Credit where credit is due. The colleagues in the Commission are looking to address the problem and to make sure that this can be scaled up. And I'm sure that they will let us know when the moment is there to make this leap. Some of this connects with what I said before. The dashboard is representing many more institutions. And admittedly, we were ill-equipped to handle this kind of load, which couldn't have been envisaged, I believe, at least based on the research that was available. So we are striving very hard to answer as many tickets as we can. I know we're not there yet, and to the colleagues that are left waiting, we can but apologize. And that's also the point of the webinar, is to make sure that when the support channels are overwhelmed, that there's still information circulating. And switching gears, practicalities. And for this, I will recruit Francisco to join us yet again. Maybe I'll take a few questions in the beginning. We're nowhere near finished, by the way. And the fact that those were the most asked questions means we have quite a few more to go. So zooming back again into the Interinstitutional Agreement Manager and trying to cover some ground there. So a simple question: what happens if some of the partners do not join the Erasmus dashboard? Doesn't matter. What matters is that they join the EWP in whatever way they choose to. If they're somewhere in the EWP network, the dashboard will find them. And so they don't have to be using the same solution as you. Next question: can you make PDFs of interinstitutional agreements in the Interinstitutional Agreement Manager? Upcoming feature, indeed, in a couple of weeks, I think still in June, this should indeed be possible. So I'm excited to be able to release it and to share it with you. Admittedly, not at the moment. So thank you for pointing this out. A colleague asking, I'm wondering about the information needed in the new Interinstitutional Agreement Manager in the Erasmus dashboard when it opens in June. Will it be the same as in the dashboard as it is now? And the answer to this was actually, I think, already provided by Dagi in the introduction. By and large, yes, there have been small changes. We should have a bounty contest for you to check out what those changes are. There are some new open fields, but you will recognize 99% of what you used to see and what you worked on the testing, because some of the adjustments have already been released to you as well, and the others will come until mid-June. So don't be worried if you think that you're going to get to the Interinstitutional Agreement Manager and all of a sudden it's going to be completely different from what Francisco was doing the demo. Francisco didn't tell us, but he was actually doing the demo from what is called the development version of the dashboard. So some of the things he was showing you will be what is exactly being added in the coming days, and some, of course, are already there. Hello. When the dashboard says API already managed by a node in the EWP network, what does it really mean? We are using MoveOn, but we wish we could test interinstitutional agreement at first within the dashboard. Thank you for this question. So what is in commas there refers to the error on the dashboard settings page with the APIs. Francisco mentioned that in some cases, it will not connect you if you're already represented in the network. And so what the colleagues are doing is confirming that this validation actually works well. So if MoveOn is already representing in the EWP network for this API, for the interinstitutional agreement data, we as dashboard cannot represent you. This would create a duplicate. And so I keep coming back to this perhaps subtle or technical difference between you can have an interinstitutional agreement manager in the dashboard and the OLA in your in-now system, or vice versa. but you cannot have the interinstitutional agreement in two places, because this is a question of making sure that the data payloads arrive to where they need to be. Okay, if we use a third-party provider for the interinstitutional agreement and the Erasmus dashboard for the OLA, what I was just mentioning, do we need to take no for both questions in the EWP settings, or should we take yes for the question concerning the static data, so our partners using the dashboard can see our default data? Okay, I have to break this down a little bit because I think there's something to unpack here. No, regarding the first sentence of the question put forward by these colleagues. As of today, if you go to the settings of the dashboard, you still don't see the option to connect the OLA. That will come as we approach mid-June in the days ahead. So just to make it clear that when the colleagues mentioned both questions for the EWP settings, both of these questions, as in Francisco's demo, concern the interinstitutional agreement. Now, if the colleagues use the third-party provider for the interinstitutional agreement, this particular boxes should not be checked. And this brings me to the second part of the question. So if you have a third-party provider for the interinstitutional agreement, your static data will be, your default data, sorry, will be broadcasted, will be published and made available in EWP by your third-party provider, to the best of our knowledge. So in this sense, you don't have to activate it on both sides. I appreciate the question because it shows a good level of diligence, but this would not be needed. What you would need eventually is, if you want to use the dashboard for the OLA, to activate that API, the one that is forthcoming. It gets a little bit confusing without looking at it, but since we had the demo before, I hope that this helps. And I think I've spoken too much already. Francisco, what do you think about this question?
So thank you for coming back to me on some of the questions. So are we expected to know the contact person of all our partners? Explaining this, as the EWP works as a network, and when you create an agreement in the dashboard, it sends the agreement to your partner service and is displayed there. There is no email, so you don't exactly need to know the contact person. So you can put, for example, the email of the general email of the institution. The agreement is sent to the partner, and then it's the internal service of the partner that has to deal with who is notified about receiving this agreement.
Thanks a lot, Francisco. I'm going to continue picking your brain a little bit longer. We have a colleague asking, do all the institutions have to be set up individually, or is there a bulk import feature for this information? And this information, I think, also refers to the interinstitutional agreement.
Yeah. So going from the principle that we are talking about the interinstitutional agreements data, you have indeed a feature in the left side below the button of creating a new agreement, which is called the import button, where you can import a CSV file, which, if is correctly structured, will import all the agreements data that is on that CSV file and will do according to the specification if you were creating a new agreement for each of those.
Thank you, Francisco. And do you reckon it's possible to put staff and students in one interinstitutional agreement?
Yes, it is possible to put staff and student in one agreement. It is possible to put only one of those. You can do as much cooperating conditions as you prefer, and with the specifications that you may need.
Thank you. And what happens if one institution uses a slightly different ISCAD code than the partner?
So, upon creating an agreement, you can only select those ISCAD codes that are present there. So, on the dashboard side, when creating or editing an agreement, you will not see any effect. You just select those agreements, so you don't have any difficulties. On this end, you have to select from those. You cannot write any of your own. Upon sending through the network this agreement that you have created, the partner has to have some translation mechanism to make the proper translation to their own system. The same is valid on the other way around. If a partner creates something, when we received it on the dashboard side, we have to have this translation mechanism if needed.
Thank you very much. I'll let you take the next question. It's about...
On my page, Interinstitutional Agreement Manager, and creating a new digital interinstitutional agreement, I have Erasmus code filled automatically. Is it normal? When you create a new digital interinstitutional agreement, what happens is that you have on the bottom left side of the agreement, you have a clear button. If you don't click that clear button, every time you access that creating a new interinstitutional agreement, the data that you have pre-filled previously will be present there. So probably it's the situation is that you have filled and you have to clear.
Thanks a lot, Francisco. I think it's time to bring another one of our friends and guests for today. Jaspers, can you hear us? Is the sound on the video? I'm asking because we couldn't do the sound check with you, but I reckon that we should be able to hear you.
I'm here and I hear you loud and clear, João.
Fantastic. So ESN is, I think, one of the most important partners in this project, and oftentimes, although also several universities play this role, notably our colleagues from Alcalá, from Rotterdam, they're working as well on trying to get to communication. It's not easy to do communication for something this big, particularly when you're working from a strategic partnership. But let's take the opportunity to also maybe revisit some questions that we received, because I think there have been some good ones. And this one should speak to you. Are students involved in testing the OLA?
I mean, I always love to see questions like these, as they highlight the importance that, of course, if we are creating a tool that's going to be used by students, there's an importance that students are involved. And the answer to this question is indeed yes. The Erasmus Student Network is a large organization of current and past Erasmus students. We are actively involved in the design of the user interface of the new OLA. We gather inputs on this. I actually have a document open in one of my tabs, some recommendations from one of our member organizations. So yes, we're trying to put an extra emphasis for this version of OLA to make it accessible to students.
Thanks a lot, both for the testing and for the answer. And another question was whether it might be possible to provide a video as to how the process looks like from the student side.
Indeed, it's a very nice idea, one that we're actually working on. Spoilers for things that are going to come down the line. We are indeed working on some video tutorials for certain parts of the OLA interface, because these have been requested both by students and also by you, the institutions, as well. You also no doubt want to know how the front end of the new OLA works. So we will have some ready, and they will be added as part of all the new materials that are going to come in very soon about the new OLA.
Thanks a lot, Jaspers. I think this is roughly the same question. I suppose that it's kind of already answered, but I don't know if you want to add something, or else we'll just take it from here.
You can take a gander and put a slightly different spin. We are indeed within the consortium looking at how to best do tutorials. So what I can add in comparison to the last question is that we are looking at different formats and how to best deliver this information. So there will be a variety of information, of ways how to see it, such as text or audiovisual. And I can also add that we're trying to put an extra emphasis on the user experience to reduce the need for there to be a tutorial, as any system should be one that the students can pick up and start using from the get-go without the need to watch several tutorials.
Indeed, actually, this was one of the things we looked at in the evaluation of the OLA tool as well, and actually we got very encouraging feedback. Doesn't mean it's perfect, hence the effort to go the extra mile. And I reckon the next question is rather about videos or tutorials for the universities themselves. I don't know if you are up to speed on the work that is being done on this front.
I think that Nacho, if he's here, can help me out with this.
Fair point. Nacho, do you know more about the work being done in this respect?
Well, as Casper said, it's a fantastic tool for all our colleagues to understand how to operate the functionalities, and actually it's a good an idea that we are actually working on that. As Josh mentioned, developing a very quick strategy for communication is always difficult. We are seeing how functionalities change and many other questions, but we are working actually at this moment in an efficient campaign of communication to our colleagues in universities to see what we were talking about.
And actually working on this today, I think one of the tutorials that will be used is the presentation that Francisco did, which will provide us an update vis-a-vis some of the materials that are in the Knowledge Center already. Nacho and Casper, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. But I think it's time to bring yet another guest. Oana, thank you for joining us. Oana is a colleague of Nadia at the JAC. And for some questions, we think that it would be a bit stretching it if we were the ones trying to provide the answers. So with your permission, I might try to run a few by you, if that's okay. And I would start with the question of, with the implementation of EWP, whether it's still required to archive the originals of the Erasmus Plus grant agreements.
Yeah, so it's a good question that came to us in other forms as well. I think, yes, we need to, the advice is for you to store still the Erasmus Plus grant agreement as well as the other Erasmus Plus documentation for the purpose of audits.
Thank you. And what if the partners are not registered in the dashboard, whether that means that we would need to follow the paper track for learning agreement?
Okay, so first of all, if your partner is already yet to exchange digital mobility agreement, then I think the first thing to do is really to try to actively encourage your partner to get there as soon as possible. The reason why we're saying this is because it's on the one hand an issue for you as well if you have to carry out paper mobility, mobility on paper and then mobility digitally. So it produces a lot of issues in that sense. And also because a lot of the features of the ultimate outputs of the European Student Card Initiative are dependent on this. For instance, just the first thought on the interinstitutional agreements, if you did not, for instance, digitally sign the interinstitutional agreements, then students will not be able to see on the Erasmus Plus app when they're looking for their possibilities for mobility. They won't be able to see that, to retrieve that information. So these are just a few of the examples why it's really, really important that both partners are connected as soon as possible. However, in the exceptional cases where this is not possible, it will be allowed indeed to sign paper learning agreements using the template that exists on the Erasmus Plus website. But again, with the strong encouragement to use digital mobility management as soon as possible.
And if I may, Oana, as soon as possible, is there a cutoff date for that, maybe?
Yes, I thought it was the cutoff date for that indeed is by the beginning of the academic year 2022-2023. That is so beginning with June as soon as possible, but by that firm deadline.
I suspect the question will pop up again, but I think it's an important thing to kind of drive home the message.
Sure.
Thank you. So going from there, regarding the interinstitutional agreements, I'm sorry, we're going to see variations of the same question as well, and we've put them here because, so that the colleagues can relate to the answers as much as possible. One of the questions was whether it's possible to renew the agreements temporarily, as you were just explaining, I guess, by email, so that we have a visibility, so that I guess we can advertise them to our students in October. We won't be able to do the renewal between June and October as it is too short.
Right. Okay. So here it's really important to bring the point across that the European Commission has passed on the message that the previous interinstitutional agreements under the previous Erasmus Plus program will remain valid until higher education institutions will be able to assign their interinstitutional agreements digitally. So I think in this particular case, you can continue using your older interinstitutional agreements through this extension. This extension was agreed not only as part of the European Student Card Initiative, but in light of the delays that have happened due to COVID-19. And it was a decision taken, yes, by all sectors in our Director General. So I think more or less this kind of explains the question. So you can continue this partnership through your previous agreement, and then when you're ready to connect digitally, you should do so.
Thanks, Joanna. Now, this is a special question because it has a blue arrow, which means that it's an objective duplicate which would follow. I'll read both and maybe you can answer them together, so that's okay. So a colleague asked, how should we understand the deadline start of the 2022 academic year? Is it June? Is it September? And as I've said in the beginning, we did got a lot of duplicate questions. Sometimes we've put them both just to be sure. So the other example was we have an in-house system and our interinstitutional agreement module will not be ready in June. We are considering renewing on paper now and connecting to EWP later. When exactly is the deadline to connect? Is it the 1st of September of 2022? I think links with the academic year that you mentioned before, how to interpret that.
So linking to this question, of course, please be aware of my answer to the previous question regarding the interinstitutional agreements. So you don't need to go on paper for the IIAs because you can consider the older IIAs valid. But when it comes to renewing, so if you're not ready in June, the hard deadline to connect, again, as we always said, it's by the beginning of the academic year 2022-2023, and this depends, of course, according to the country. So this depends on the beginning of the academic year in your particular country, in your particular higher education institution. Now, if there's two partners and the beginning of the academic year is different, then you would use the earliest date, of course, the beginning. So if, for instance, in one country, the academic year starts in September and in another it starts in October, then September 2022 would be your deadline.
Thank you, Anna. And another one, which is we were told that digital learning agreements will be compulsory from the call 2022 onwards. But now you, and I don't think they mean you personally, are saying that this is from the academic year 22-23 onwards. And which one is correct?
So the correct one is from the academic year 2022-2023. And to kind of explain why we took this decision is because we want, regardless of the call years, right? So the call years affect the funding through which mobilities will be supported, right? But then if we, for your IT colleagues, for you in terms of managing mobility and for the student, what makes sense is that no matter through which kind of funding they are funded, if all of them are going on mobility, let's say in September 2022, they all go through the same procedures. So this was the logic behind why we proposed the academic year 2022-2023, in order to make it easier for the higher education institutions and also for the students to have the same kind of treatment. So I can confirm that it's this approach.
Thank you for the clarity. We're not done yet. We have another double question. So this is about when will the real connection to the mobility tool and / beneficiary module will take place. A version of this question, and in this case, probably they mean me from the previous webinar, is that if this is being connected and if you can say more about this. I'm happy to chip in, but maybe you'd be happy, you could go first.
I can go first and then you can take over. I'm sure you know much more about these things than I do. So yes, indeed, there exists. So we're already working on this. There already exists a link between the Mobility Tool Plus and the EWP, which you could see as well in the previous presentation. So there's a flow of data from MT Plus into the EWP in terms of retrieving the peaks and I think also the proposal numbers. Now, what is being worked on is the flow in the different direction, the opposite direction, right? So from the EWP towards what will be in the future, the beneficiary module. And this is what is being worked on at the moment. The situation is as follows. At the moment, the colleagues in IT are still working on developing and finalizing what will be the future beneficiary module, which means that this link is planned for next year. And we will be able to tell you more about it at a later stage. But the ultimate purpose of this link is indeed that if you input the information for the interinstitutional agreement, for the online learning agreements, that you only do it once, so that it simplifies your work. And João, please tell me if you have anything to complete or if I made it.
No, that's a very honest explanation. So I think when the colleague, I'll go back one slide, when he talked about the real connection, what's in everybody's mind, including our own, is the notion of being able to automatically handle reporting to the mobility tool, which of course is something that would be pretty awesome. And this work started in 2018 already, in fact. And it's true that this year we haven't been able to get as far as we would like to, but I'd also take the opportunity to thank Oana and Nadia and several other colleagues in DIGIAC, which are still fighting to make this a reality as soon as possible. And indeed, there is no firm timeline, but the work hasn't stopped as well. So we hope that, we'll have some cool stuff to share with you. And we have to save some good news as well for 2022. So please bear with us. Okay, this is an interesting one. We would like to know more about the funding granted by Erasmus to establishments applying the mobility digitization program. What do you reckon, Anna?
So here we can see that, of course, we've already communicated. I'm sure all the colleagues are very well informed about the new priorities of the program when it comes to digitalization, inclusion, and environmentally friendly practices. And of course, they had to complete the HA applications in order to be accredited. And in this regard, we of course realized that we need to give more support to higher education institutions in order to be able to implement them. These priorities. So when it comes to digitalization, as well as the other priorities, we have foreseen an increase in the organizational support budget. So the organizational support has increased with 15% from the previous program. So we highly encourage you to make use of the OS funding in order to develop these priorities.
Indeed, and if I might add a quick question on this topic, is it still a priority for Key Action 2 projects as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I really like this question because it sounds so honest, and I can almost, I think we've all met colleagues that are in this situation. So this was a colleague that said, we're a small state-run higher education school. Local education authorities are a student data provider. We do our own mobility management, but they don't want to get involved in transferring student info. Help, exclamation mark. I think the exclamation mark is telling as well.
Yeah.
This is tricky because we probably can't comment on the specifics as such, but I don't know if you have any advice for these colleagues out there.
Yeah, so we do actually. I think the first thing to mention is that every time, we come from the European Commission and we give this presentation to you where we talk about achieving the European education area by 2025, it's really not just to mention it again. It's really to make you aware of the fact that there is a commitment by heads of government of member states to the priorities of the European education area. So this has been agreed at high level, and we have strong grounding for it at high level. The European Student Card Initiative is an essential component of achieving the European education area by 2025 in the field of higher education, meaning that it would be good indeed to bring this up, because all the authorities, local and national authorities as well, have committed themselves to this. So this would be, in communicating to them, this would be something that you should definitely point out. The second point that I wanted to emphasize here is that you say in this question, they don't want to get involved in transferring student information. And what we would say is that, well, in fact, you are already transferring student information because you're already doing it via emails or through different other means. So we're not asking you to start transferring student information. We're just asking you to start transferring student information, which you have already done, but in a different way, in a more kind of efficient, speedy, simplified way. So this is another point to kind of that could help your argument in discussing this with the local authorities. And thirdly, if you have issues as well, of course, from our point of view, from the European perspective, it's harder for us to have to take action, but I think you should get more support and to get in touch with your national agency in case they can support you with this.
Thanks a lot, Anna. I think I still have at least one more question to you, and this is a big one, which is, and you already alluded to it, but nonetheless, for the sake of clarity, what happens if we're not ready in June 2021 for using EWP? And the version B of the question, even more specific, is if we're not ready in June, what should we do regarding interinstitutional agreements, learning agreements? Is there a firm deadline regarding until when they can be signed on paper? And I know you've already talked about this, but maybe it's not too much to double down to.
Yes, sure. I think, again, so to mention, for the IIAs, this is kind of the approach. Maintain your existing agreements. These are agreements that you've had with these previous institutions, they remain valid. But try as soon as possible to connect digitally. So in a way, for the interinstitutional agreements, you are covered by this extension of the validation during this transitional year that we have allowed. But please try to connect as soon as possible. For the online learning agreement, if you are not ready, as I also stated before in other presentations as well, you are able to use a paper version of the online learning agreement, but are required to move to digital mobility management as soon as possible and to start signing the OLA digitally. But really, when it comes to the OLA, with any paper kind of format, it really needs to be exceptions. So we've already communicated this, that we want to see this in a minority of cases, and that we ask your national agencies to closely work with you and to understand why it was not possible for this to be done earlier to support you. But we do need to have this firm deadline that I communicated before the start of the 2022-2023 academic year, because otherwise this initiative will not be able to work if all of us are doing different practices. Yes, so I hope that clarifies it a bit. I hope I dealt with most of the all of the questions actually.
It does, and I'll double down on that plea, because if we do have a large number of exceptions, this kind of defeats the purpose of creating a level playing field, an ecosystem where we can exchange data, because we started this process because many of you had to jump around different websites, the websites of your partners, put denominations in one place and in another place, and that means that that's what we're trying to leave behind. And so I think many of our universities and many of the colleagues that have been with us here today, they've made a huge effort to try to be ready on time. And I think everyone is really doing their hardest. But for each partner that cannot be reached, it means going back to, I could say the fax machine. Of course, it's going to be an email, but nonetheless, I think the more we can converge on this, and the quicker we can negotiate this transition, we literally all benefit from it. So not speaking on behalf of the Commission, obviously, but I think speaking on behalf of a few universities that are looking forward for this. Well, Anna, thank you so much. And now I will try to take on a bit of an elephant in the room. And we got quite a few questions on this very topic. We had a colleague that very bluntly and very nicely started asking this. I think this was a question from last week. We've had colleagues reaching out saying, how can we get advice on our situation? How can we best connect to EWP? Colleagues saying we need a step-by-step training on how to use EWP. We've done a step-by-step today on some aspects of it, but I think it's not necessarily a training as such. Training sessions on the dashboards, trainings on how to use EWP, and the fact that the Competence Center doesn't necessarily cover all of such needs. And again, questions reaching out, and I think you can see what the pattern here is. Now, I'd like to start by saying that a lot of effort has already went into not just setting up the knowledge base, doing the webinars, setting up the support channels and keeping them as actively as we can. Last week, we've heard from a colleague from a national agency, how the national agencies themselves are trying to help the higher education institutions to navigate this challenging transition. But we also, we need to be pragmatic. And when we see so many requests for trainings, this is an obvious sign that whatever has been done until now is not quite enough. And maybe the time has come to really look into how we can offer the possibility to higher education institutions, to IROs, to have this opportunity in terms of the topics that we're discussing today, for example. And I also have to say, as someone that works in higher education, obviously don't misconstrue me, because we do understand a webinar is not a replacement for having a space where you can interact, where you can ask questions, because this would be the same thing of saying that university classrooms can easily be replaced by MOOCs, which is a discussion we've been having for some years, and I think the results are increasingly clear. There is something else that we've noticed, particularly last week, because we're organizing the webinar, and we're running the webinar and we're seeing companies using the chat and the comment box to advertise their consulting services, which is a bit awkward because they certainly have their business and their agenda and their capacity that they're willing to share with you, but we're not affiliated with them, which is something I really want to stress. And that means that we can't vouch for the quality of support that you might get or that they're selling. So whilst until now we really tried to work through the channels that I mentioned earlier, we've been discussing with the various project teams and with our universities, and I would just like to confirm that we will start organizing trainings on these digital topics from the next academic year, exactly in the same spirit that brought us to the point of developing these solutions, which was universities helping other universities solving their own problems. So we will have more details to share on this from here until autumn. Stay tuned. Obviously, we'll keep you abreast of it. But to acknowledge that this is a recurrent question and clearly something needs to be done about it. These were the good news. Now, this section is about bad news, because we also get a lot of questions about the scope of the tools and also new functionality. And questions about scope, they tend to be quite binary. And let me give you some examples. I really don't mean to sound discouraging, because as I said in the beginning, I think there are already some really interesting success stories. But for example, and this is, I think, not discouraging anyone, it's a question of clarity. We have colleagues asking about apprenticeships, universities, higher education institutions that only do trainings. And presumably, I hope that we've clarified it already today, but just to be crystal clear, this is not something that is within scope of the current transition. Obviously, there's interests, passionate interests, I would say, to go in that direction. But there is a common thread to the next couple of questions. We also get questions about the new Key Action 131, about the partner countries and whether they need to be connected. We also get questions, for example, about staff mobility and whether that can be managed through EWP. And we've said it a few times, but not necessarily everyone has the time to go to every webinar or conference or workshop on the topic, that the method that we've deployed going back to the beginning of this projects and initiatives was find a problem, solve it, and if we succeed in solving that problem, move on to solve more problems. So what we're doing, what we're attempting to do now, and this really is at the moment of truth, whether the extent to which these efforts will come together, and is start with the student mobility in intra-European mobility. And if that goes as we open, as we plan, I think if the Commission so desires, there will be certainly interest to start tackling some of the challenges that the colleagues have brought up and to extend this to other strands of the program. We do understand, obviously, that the step-by-step approach is not as good as solving everything at once, but typically the problem of solving everything at once is that you don't solve anything. So let's score some points on what is the biggest part of the program for at least many of us. And then let's learn from this, and hopefully we can make quick progress in venturing a little bit beyond as well. Grant agreements. I separated this question from the previous ones because it is a question of scope. but it has a slightly different rationale. So up to now, all of the examples that have been digitized, they focused on cross-border data exchanges, interinstitutional agreements, learning agreements, also the nominations and the transfer of records, which are already supported by APIs and by several providers. These are from one university to the other, sometimes with a student involved. Whilst grant agreements are something internal to each university, it's between the university and their outgoing students. So this has also not been in scope. And whether they should remain paper-based or not is not something that is directly touched by the current process. Now, we have many universities, and I think including some of those that presented here today, that are also looking to digitize the grant agreements. And it is a very interesting topic. It's the logic continuation of a lot of this effort. But as we speak, it's not something that we have taken on the challenge for, but obviously they should be digitized. And if anything, it's much easier to do so now than it was 4, 5, 6 years ago, where the technological frameworks and the legal frameworks still pose some obstacles. Now, this is a really, really good question. I think all of the OLA team is kind of excited about this. And now I start shifting from scope to functionality. So will there be a possibility to connect a course catalog to OLA so that the students can choose instead of typing content on the tables? And the short answer is yes. And in fact, some of you might know that we've already made a demo of this functionality in a conference last year before the pandemic hit us. I think it was in February in Luxembourg. And there is a course data API in EWP, but what we've noticed in the testing is that there's further development that is needed. It's difficult to prioritize this particular task, but it's something we're very excited. So there is some work there. We're not be putting deadlines today because you can imagine the June transition is something that is consuming a lot of our time and attention in terms of the testing, but you should expect progress here because it would be a huge usability gain for the students, undoubtedly. So thank you for asking this. This is really something that we're very invested in. And there was also a question about pre-filling the interinstitutional info in the interinstitutional agreements, so not to repeat every time. I would just acknowledge that this is something that we hear sporadically about. We've noted this feature requests. What we've done, for example, in the testing of the interinstitutional agreement manager is that we've asked the users, some of you probably, to let us know what were the priorities in terms of improvements, and this didn't make it to the top. So I hope we're going to get there, but it hasn't been a key issue, and as such, the time hasn't arrived yet to solve it, but it is in our radar as well. Thank you for bringing it up. Now, this is another very interesting question. Qualified electronic signatures. I don't know if everyone in the audience know what this is. If you don't, Google, it's kind of interesting. The short answer to this is no. And it's not no because it's not desirable. Francisco, for example, is working exactly on some of these issues together with other colleagues. But it's no because if we make this the threshold, the minimum requirement, this will leave several higher education institutions, several program countries behind because the rollout of qualified electronic signatures has not yet reached the level of maturity that would make this possible to make for a seamless transition. It is a very, it's something that I think we would love to jump into because it's a very powerful and solid framework. But when considering when to deploy and when to shift to the solutions, we need to negotiate the reality on the ground because it wouldn't be, if we're trying to create a level playing field for all 5,000 higher education institutions, we also need to consider whether the time is right for it. And this was a really nice, I don't know if this is a question as much as a suggestion. So a colleague that reached out and said, and asked if we're planning to develop the new Erasmus app to be able to read QR codes of flight tickets or train tickets in order to be able to connect it with the student mobility and the proof of physical mobility. I think the answer is no and yes at the same time. No, because when the Erasmus app development was being planned, it was not yet known what the rules of the current program would be, and there have been proposals, including by us, to simplify the question of the proof of the physical mobility. So at the time we didn't know if it was going to stay or no, but it's a really cool idea. So I'm sure that it's something that we will be discussing whether it will be possible to add in the future, because now that we know that these proofs are still required, at least in some cases, it would make a lot of sense to streamline that. So thanks for, it's super cool suggestion. And well, I'll just continue. Okay, so this question is, it will take at least 1 or 2 years to have in-house student information systems connected to EWP. If we use dashboards or a commercial solution in the meantime, is it possible to switch EWP connections to in-house student information systems later? Yes. It's possible to do it now already, to be honest, but we're going to make this more convenient. So I think we've talked a little bit about this in previous webinars. There's going to be work in the second half of this year to support this kind of transition. So if you're doing this with 1 or 2 years in advance, I think you'll be cool. If you want to switch next week, then yeah, it's still possible, but it's not as elegant as it will be in the future. So thank you for this question. I think it's also very relevant. Ooh, yes. Daig, I think I've been speaking for a little bit too long. Would you like to join me for this one? If you're still...
Sure, no, I'm still here. So yes, the question about the SHA code and the worry if it's not Edu or another common format, if that is a problem, and it's not. As long as it's your domain, it's your website, SHA code serves as unique identifier. That's all you need, so it shouldn't be a problem. If we use dashboard, do we have to connect it to our internal tool? No, that's not a prerequisite, or that's not a necessity. You can continue using it this way as well.
Actually, right now it shouldn't be possible as such. Maybe when we have this course catalog link that we've talked before, there'll be a nice thing, a nice option to do so, but it's really built not to be connected to internal tools.
So the next one, are learning agreements for incoming and learning agreements for outgoing different channels in the EWP? I think that where this question is aiming at is if there can be the split, and I can use one system for incomings and another system for outgoings, and that's not the case. The learning agreement as process is one, so it should be, the choice needs to be made of what represents you in the network and deals with this data.
Exactly. Thank you, Daig.
So does the EWP technology allow to use one API? Yes. So for interinstitutional agreements via the dashboard, and another, for example, for learning agreements via the third party or own system. So, and this split is possible because these are different processes, and that is something that is, that is supported.
Very much so. So thank you for confirming what I've said. But indeed, that is one of the questions we get all the time. Hopefully in the future, you don't need to, be spread between 2 different places. But if if something you need, in the meantime, the technology does support it.
And yeah, I think this question actually, well, it's the same story of, so yeah, indeed.
So indeed, you can split you can do what we call the mix and match. No problem there. What you cannot do is to use 2 systems for the interinstitutional agreement, or for the OLA, or for any EWP service. In fact, this is a requirement of the architecture.
Yes, the next question is, so do institutions that cannot register contact the EUF directly, or is there some other procedure? Institution in question has the charter, but they are not in the drop-down menu of the dashboard when they're trying to register. So the issue here is, and what is connected to is that the charter holders list, of course, as you know, is being updated constantly. And the big change that has now recently happened is because of the new program and the renewals of the charters. And this is basically what's something that we're still working together with the European Commission on cleaning of that list and making sure that we have a nice data set that can talk with different systems, and indeed can be also as the backbone of the dashboard, and have all of the different institutions that are now also new ones there, and soon they'll also be able to register in the dashboard and find them there.
Exactly. Maybe I would add, Daig, if you allow me, that to our best knowledge, these are education institutions that are new to the program, that they cannot yet access the dashboard. They will be able to do that in June, presumably mid-June, when this new set of features goes live. We hope that this list can also be updated as per the latest information on the ECHA list. So if there are colleagues that feel, oh, damn it, we're new, but we're going to already fail the deadline, I think we'll have your back here.
Indeed. The next question is, how do we universities without any in-house systems know that we are doing fine? It's quite an existential one. But I mean, all in all, if you have clarity of how you are exchanging the interinstitutional agreements and learning agreements via the Erasmus Without Paper network, I mean, for me, that means you are doing fine. So whatever is the way how you're connecting, that's basically the question that you have to answer. But yeah, of course, if there are more comments to this, then from the colleagues, I can also imagine.
I would rephrase the question slightly. If you don't have an in-house student information system, and if you are in the context of this webinar, at least looking to connect through the dashboard, just do what Francisco and Daga told in the beginning, which is make sure the connection is activated so that you can send and receive information. That should do the trick. We hope that you do fine at all levels, not just the EWP level, of course, but that's where probably it goes a little bit out of scope. Daga, if you can do perhaps another one or two.
Sure. What I see here is that I think it's the same story if there can be the split. So yeah, using, for example, online learning agreement via one system and interinstitutional agreement by another. So yes, theoretically, yes. The next, well.
Maybe I'll jump into this one if you allow me. So this is a good question because we've been since a few months, in fact, mentioning that we really want to get rid of the Google accounts for lots of reasons, notwithstanding privacy related ones. And we hope that we will be able to do this until the end of August. There's a lot of work happening on this front, and it kind of depends on you, all the universities out there, whether the requirements have been met for the switch to happen. There will be exceptions. There will be institutions that, because they don't have EduGain, which is the academic authentication system that many of you use, might still require students to use other kinds of accounts, and we are looking to enable that. But the short answer really is, let's hope can get rid of at least the vast majority of such accounts until the end of August. And this question is connected to it because obviously there are students in the system, in this case in the OLA system, that have went there with their Google account. And the colleagues rightly ask whether this is going to go up in smoke, whether she will lose her learning agreement once this option is removed. And the answer to this is no. We do have a plan of how to make sure that the students will not lose access to their data, to their learning agreements. I don't think today, it's slightly more technical question, and it's already been a kind of long webinar, so I'm not going to go into the details. There will be a way for them to link their Google account to something that carries, if not an Edu ID, at least an ESI, and national agencies are working on this as we speak. So if you are in the situation of not accessing the federated authentication, there is an emergency plan that will be rolled out precisely for the students as well as for the new ones. I think we already answered this question today. All the interinstitutional agreements be signed. That was part of Francisco's demo. It's basically a click to sign option. Multilateral agreements. The short answer is no, but it is something that the colleagues from the Commission are keen to look into and to discuss. So at present, this is not part of the current development plans, but I guess there will be an announcement if this changes in the future regarding this possibility. And this is a big one because we understand there are many colleagues out there that are working with learning agreements for traineeships. I think it was already mentioned, I maybe should have put this on the slide deck of Oana, but I think it was already mentioned at the previous webinar that this is something that we will get back to you in 2022. Now, saying this, we do acknowledge that there is a tool which is part of the OLA, which is supporting learning agreements. At this point, it's not yet clear what the next steps will be, what the timeline will be regarding its further development. So again, a topic that once the traineeships become central to this discussion, as the process moves on, we will obviously revisit. This is a good one. How do you guarantee the security of personal data throughout EWP? Now, if we're talking throughout, I suspect the colleague that asked this question is talking about the EWP network. And this could get technical very quickly, but just to give you the high-level overview. So the first thing is that there are data security and authentication protocols which are specified for the EWP network. Local systems, for example, also will typically rely on federated authentication, as it's the case of the OLA. We have absolutely central is that each higher education institution that is connected to the network, notably the ones that connect directly, they set the rights for accessing their servers. And so there is a lot of granularity and a lot of control. Ultimately, this is a technical question. And so there are articles on this topic on the developers of chapter 2, if memory serves me right, sections 2.2 and 2.6. I pretend that I know this by heart, but I'm actually looking at the Knowledge Center where this question is in the FAQ. And there's also a link to a thread on the GitHub where there's a detailed description of authentication and security issues. Even if this is in the Knowledge Center, I think it's worth taking the opportunity to mention that this is obviously something of paramount importance, and essentially reassure the colleagues that there is technical documentation on these issues precisely to make sure that personal data is appropriately secured. I could try to turn the question around, and sometimes I do, and say, well, let's compare how personal data is secured through EWP to how it's secured not in EWP, and that would make for a fascinating discussion. But we've mentioned before that one of the things that drives this process, in addition to the economies of scale, in addition to the question of student experience and others that Joanna mentioned, is also the question of compliance. Course catalog. I have the feeling we already visited this question. I'm sorry for the duplicates. So short answer is yes, in the future, hopefully we hope to make this available to you. Deletion of learning agreements. Okay, this is a good question. The first thing is that IROs can delete learning agreements, but we need to go a little bit into the detail. You can delete learning agreements that have not been signed by all parties. And some colleagues, I think, pointed out that this was a behavior that changed when we did the transition from the OLA 2.0 to 3.0, and that has to do with the connection to the network and the network rules, insofar that a unilateral delete action needs to be propagated to your partner so that the systems remain in sync. And this is something that is to be deployed. What we are doing, though, and specifically in the case of the dashboard, is that it has been brought to our attention that, for example, there is a very valid use case which concerns a learning agreement that was signed by everybody. It was ready, but, for example, the student canceled the mobility. And so that does make sense that we would be able to tag, to filter, to remove those agreements. And so it's something that the project team is looking into, and that hopefully will be part of forthcoming functionality. So thank you for this question. It's just to highlight that there are options regarding deletion. They're just not universal. How and where can the European Student Identifier be implemented in the dashboards? Well, actually, it's already implemented in the dashboards. So I suppose the colleague is wondering if and how they can see the European Student Identifier in the dashboard. And the answer to that is no, not really. It's a technical identifier. And for the most part, it's not something that we will display unless it's strictly necessary. Okay, so this question dovetails with the previous one. Sorry for not putting them together. Will there be a possibility to remove incorrect OLAs like in the OLA 2.0? Often students prepare and sign OLA without my confirmation. Sometimes even partner universities sign it. I will focus on the second half of the question because this is interesting. Because if you're using the OLA, I hope I'm not saying something wrong, but I reckon that the partner cannot sign it unless you've signed it first. So there is a certain flow. The student normally would prepare the learning agreement, would sign it, request the home university to sign it. So there is a filtering stage at this moment, and only after this would the partner university receive. And this is the same flow that applies to the EWP API that supports learning agreements. So the first part of the question stands. I think there might be a misunderstanding, maybe from my side, regarding the second part of the question. So maybe something we can look more into, but just to assert that the home university is a gatekeeper as to what the partner receives. Okay, I think, how do I define people responsible for signing the OLA? It is not the IRO, but program directors or coordinators. What kind of settings do I have to make in order to allow 20 other people to use the OLA? Now, we haven't demoed this today, I think, but if you remember the demo from Francisco, where he was showing what you can do in terms of accounts, that is in essence the answer to your question. So you do have a multi-user setting where you can add 20 or 40 or 60 colleagues. We don't really care. And there's also what Christian mentioned, that depending on the access rights are configured, you can also have people that through the dashboard can sign OLAs somewhat universally. So I think that this is already catered for. Surely it can be improved further. We have colleagues asking, can we have more granularity and permissions per faculty, for example? We actually had a question, I believe, of a colleague that says, well, I'm sending 400 students and I really would need the faculties to be isolated from one another, and we understand that problem very well. But it's, you know, a university that sends 400 students is not really the target user of the dashboard. So this is a layer of complexity that if there's opportunity to develop things further, we'll be happy to consider. But if you bear in mind how we define the population that is the target group of the dashboard, this is also not our immediate priority. We are developing our in-house solution. Would it be possible to contact third-party providers directly to make tests through EWP Dev Registry Network? Yes, please. We can't promise that they will be available because I think everyone is incredibly busy with testing, but we would certainly encourage to do so, as well as to reach out to other universities that you cooperate with so that you can carry out this technical testing together. Actually, I really like the question because the message as we transition from May to June really is test, test, tests. And so obviously you need someone to be able to test against. We have an information system with a database of all our partners, also used for exchange students to apply. Should this be linked to EWP, even though we don't currently use it for OLA and agreements? I think the answer to this is no. You see, what EWP does, to come back to Daige's phone book metaphor, it holds a list of institutions, it holds a list of how they can be reached, and it also facilitates the retrieval of institutional information when the colleagues make it available through the network, and Francisco demoed this. So I think, maybe I don't understand what use case the colleagues have in mind, but I think that there would be no need or purpose, in fact, to add this database to your EWP connection. To be honest, I think it shouldn't be supported in the current configuration as well, but thanks nonetheless for the question. Usually our webinars are in English, but the last webinar we did got a lot of questions in French, and I'll just take 5 minutes with apologies. I imagine everyone is going to disconnect now, but for Francophone friends, let me embarrass myself and try to cover some of the questions we got in French as well, to the best of our very limited ability. It will be difficult, a disclaimer that if in future webinars we receive questions in 27 languages, we do have a very diverse team linguistically speaking, but we might not be able to pull it off, but out of consideration because there really was a number of questions, and these are just some examples. So, nous n'avions que d'étudiants en stage et pas d'études. Quelles sont les dates butoirs pour nous et l'obligation? Je suis perdu. Voilà. Ça revient à la question de est-ce que l'EWP concerne la mobilité de stage? Ce n'est pas le cas pour le moment. So, je comprends, évidemment, il s'agit d'une confusion car ça sera un sujet probablement, je suppose, pour la prochaine année à confirmer vis-à-vis de la Commission européenne, vis-à-vis évidemment l'Agence nationale. Donc, nous n'avons pas de ISIS et c'est normal de devoir payer pour avoir des codes étudiants. Bon, je ne sais pas exactement qu'est-ce que c'est le ISIS dans le contexte français. Je suppose que peut-être le collègue veut dire European Student Identifier, ESI. La deuxième partie de la phrase, absolument pas. Il n'y a pas même l'idée de payer pour avoir des codes étudiants. Je ne sais pas exactement s'il y a quelqu'un que vous offre un service à ce niveau, mais non, normalement, pas du tout, enfin. Et ça, c'est un peu plus difficile. Donc, le technicien informatique ne parlant pas anglais et tout est anglais. Voilà. Comment faire? Vous trouvez de l'aide en français. Donc, évidemment, ce sera super, nous aimerions bien d'avoir toute la documentation et toute la langue, mais objectivement, ce n'est pas possible aussi. Donc, en fait, je ne sais pas. Ce n'est pas évident comment pour aider le collègue, dans ce cas, le collègue francophone, mais je suppose que dans le même... Bon, auparavant, on a parlé de l'avantage de travailler en contexte, aussi en mentalité open source. Donc, je suppose que ça sera un cas d'avoir le collègue pour rassembler et aider les autres. Je suppose que dans certaines équipes techniques, il y a des collègues qui parlent anglais et français. Évidemment, je me répète, mais ce sera très, très bien d'avoir toute la documentation, toute la langue, mais c'est aussi une question de ressources. Donc, sur quelque chose que je suppose qu'il faudrait discuter au niveau national avec le collègue d'agence, comment est-ce qu'on peut coordonner, travailler ensemble pour voilà, arriver à peut-être traduire certains composants, avoir de formes de discussion en français. J'imagine que ça sera très facile. Il y a tellement d'universités dans le pays, normalement, avec un peu de solidarité, on se débrouille, j'espère du moins. Voilà. Je m'excuse pour mon français, pour le niveau vers le collègue francophone, mais merci de votre question aussi. And I finish with, I think this is the last question for today. And the colleague is pointing out, why is nothing ready yet? The new program has been 7 years in the making. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. Now, the first thing I would say is, I think there are two answers to this question, to be quite honest with you, with all of you, which is, I think the question betrays the fact that some colleagues are not aware that some things have been ready since a long time. The OLA has been in production since 2016, the dashboard since 2017, the EWP Network since 2019, and the roadmap, the guidelines and the timelines, was published in March 2019 by the European Commission. So it's a question that we probably have to ask ourselves, because it stands to reason that quite a few higher education institutions have left their preparations somewhat last minute. And obviously this was not helped by the pandemic. There is, however, one thing that has not been 7 years in the making, and that is the exact configuration, the exact rules, templates, and flows of the new program. And this is something that I think it was difficult for all of us. I think it was difficult. I don't mean to put words in the mouths of the colleagues from the Commission, evidently, but based on our experience and our involvement in this is always a difficult process, because time is always in short supply. So I think this calls for a reflection in the future about how we organize this kind of transitions. But I see some parallels here with the history of science and evolutionary theory, because back in the days where the only thing we had was the fossil records to help us reconstitute how, certain species developed, we assumed they developed in little jumps. And that's kind of how the Erasmus program historically has been working. It's every 7 years that we have a window of opportunity to adjust the framework, the manner in which it works. But of course that the fossil record was, the theories based on that, they went out of the window with Darwinian evolution. And I think that the step of digitizing Erasmus, hopefully, I mean, this is food for thought really, is that it should allow us to to ensure that its evolution happens in a more continuous, and if I'm honest, also in a smoother basis. There are many discussions we've had as a community over the years about the fact that things change from one year to the next, and not always we feel we have enough heads up. And I think these are questions that we will be concerned in the future as things move forward, to try to essentially to build on the achievements that we've all put together. So I'm ending on a slightly philosophical note, acknowledging that I do understand the frustration and even the bewilderment of why so many things that so very much last minute. But I also think that I hope that in the coming weeks, all of you, because most of you, I think we haven't shown you the results of the Mentimeter, but most of you in attendance reported being here because you want to use the dashboard. We had colleagues from different situations, curious colleagues, which are obviously very welcome to be with us. But I really hope that in the next couple of weeks, you will see the fruits of the work and the preparation that you've also done in order to be ready for the next program. And from my side, I would just like to end by thanking very much indeed to the colleagues that have contributed today, starting with Kaspers, with Nacho, Francisco, Anna, Nadia, and of course, Kristen. And I hope I haven't forgotten anyone, because it was a big team. We have Yaram helping us from the side of our team as well. And of course, Tiger, that has been heavily involved in the planning and the preparation, and that I would leave to do the closing statement. So thank you very much all for being with us today.
Indeed. Well, also thank you from my side. And it has been a very, very long webinar. And well, in that, we do hope that many questions have been also answered. And it's, as mentioned, it's a summary of the previous questions from the last week. It's also the stuff that was submitted upon the registration of this webinar, and also what we still managed to get from the questions and answers that we, during the webinar, still included there. But yes, all in all, we thank you for your attention, and we do hope that this material will be of great help for you as you're moving forward and as we are all entering this month of transition when the Erasmus Without Paper finally comes into being. So thank you all, and wish you a very nice evening.